My brother-in-law raised his wine glass at my father's memorial dinner and asked if my army job meant I still folded socks for a living. Everyone laughed. My mother stared down at her plate. My sister smiled into her wine. And I stood there in my dress uniform, with my father's folded flag still warm from my hands, wondering how grief had turned into another room where my family waited for me to be humiliated. Preston Vale did not know who I really was. He knew I was Mara, the quiet daughter, the one who missed holidays, the one who sent money but did not send explanations, the one my family described as distant, difficult, and too military to understand real life. He knew I had an army job. He did not know his company was one step away from losing a $50 million army facilities contract. He did not know his proposal had already been flagged by an independent review team. He did not know the red flag carried my father's name, and he definitely did not know that the insult he threw at me over catered salmon and polished silverware would become part of the story that exposed exactly what kind of man he was. But I knew enough to stay quiet. That was the part they always mistook for weakness. My father, Henry Bennett, died on a Tuesday morning at 4:13 a.m. The hospice nurse called while I was standing in a windowless conference room at Fort Ashland, listening to a contractor explain why a delayed generator shipment was not technically delayed. I saw the number. My stomach knew before my mind did. "Colonel Bennett?" the nurse said softly. I stepped into the hallway. "Yes. I'm so sorry." I pressed my palm against the cold cinder block wall. For 1 second, I was not a colonel. I was not an officer. I was not the woman people came to when a contract file had to be clean and impossible to pressure. I was just a daughter who had not made it home in time. "Was he alone?" I asked. "No," she said. "Mr. Bishop was with him. Earl." I closed my eyes. "Did he suffer?" "No. He was peaceful. He asked for you twice. Then he asked me to make sure the green folder stayed with Earl." I opened my eyes. "The green folder?" "Yes, ma'am. He said you would know." I did not know. That should have warned me. My father labeled everything. Toolboxes, tax folders, coffee cans full of screws. He did not do mystery. And Dad's red toolbox was the closest thing he had to a safe. If something mattered, he hid it under the tray. If he left a green folder with Earl, it meant he did not trust someone else to find it first. "Thank you," I said. My voice sounded normal. The Army teaches you that. How to sound normal when the floor disappears. I returned to the conference room. 12 people looked up. I picked up my pen. "Continue," I said. The contractor kept talking. I did not hear a word. I flew home to Ohio 2 days later. The funeral was held at St. Catherine's, the same brick church where my parents had married, and where Dad used to fix loose handrails because he said old women should not have to climb broken steps. By the time I arrived, Olivia had turned my father's death into an event. White roses, gold-edged guest book, soft piano music, a framed photograph of Dad in his younger years, beside a truck he rebuilt with his own hands. And beside that, a printed sign. "With deepest gratitude to Olivia and Preston Vale for their generous support and devotion during Henry Bennett's final illness." I stood in front of that sign for a long time, not because I was surprised, because I was tired. 3 years of automatic transfers from my account had paid for Dad's care. The home oxygen, the hospital bed, the private nurse, the medication that did not save him but gave him 6 more months on his porch, drinking terrible coffee with Earl and arguing about baseball. Olivia picked the flowers. Preston accepted the sympathy. My mother thanked them in public. And I kept quiet because Dad had asked me to. "Your sister needs to feel important," he told me once, his voice thin through the phone. "She lets people think she paid for everything," I said. Dad coughed for so long I almost called the nurse. When he could speak again, he said, "Promise me you won't turn my sickness into another battlefield." So I promised. When I walked into the church in my Army service uniform, the conversation softened. My mother saw me from the front pew. Her face tightened. "Mara," she whispered. "Mom." I leaned down to hug her. She turned her cheek, so my lips caught air. "You wore that?" "Dad asked me to." Her eyes flicked toward the guests. "It feels a little dramatic. My father was lying in a casket 12 feet away, and my mother was worried I looked dramatic." Before I could answer, Olivia appeared in a black designer dress with perfect sleeves, red eyes, and flawless makeup. "Mara," she said, too warmly. That was Olivia's gift. She could make affection sound like a warning. She glanced over my uniform. I wish you had called before deciding on this. Dad wanted it. Her mouth tightened. Dad was on morphine. The words hit hard. I kept my face still. Olivia leaned closer. Preston has clients coming later. Defense people. Important people. We don't need this becoming some military performance. This is Dad's funeral. Exactly. Dad's funeral. Not your promotion ceremony. I'm not being promoted. No, she said softly. Of course not. There it was. The old family script. Mara was difficult. Mara was defensive. Mara thought the army made her special. I looked past her to the casket. Dad's hands were folded over his chest. The funeral director had made him look too smooth, too still. There was a small flag pin in his lapel. He would have hated the roses. He liked sunflowers because they looked like they had work to do. Where do you want me? I asked. Olivia blinked, surprised I did not argue. Second row. Not with the family? Her smile did not move. You've been gone so long. People will expect the front row to be for those who were actually here. My mother looked at the floor. That hurt more than Olivia's words. Second row is fine, I said. I sat alone, behind my mother, Olivia, Preston, and their daughter Layla. Layla turned around. She was 17 now. The last time I had seen her, she had braces and purple sneakers. Now she looked like Olivia from the side. But her eyes were Dad's. Gray-blue. Careful. Aunt Mara, she whispered. Hi, Lee. Her face softened at the nickname. Then Olivia touched her wrist. Layla turned back around. The service began. The priest spoke of duty, faith, love, and family. I stared at the back of my mother's head and tried not to think about the last voicemail Dad had left me. Hey, kiddo. Don't worry about me. The nurse says I'm stubborn enough to annoy everyone until Christmas. You just do your job. I'm proud of you. Always have been. Don't let anyone tell you different. I had saved that voicemail. When the service ended, I helped fold the flag. The funeral director looked uncertain until I stepped forward. I can do it, I said. Preston made a soft sound behind me. Not quite a laugh. Not quite a cough. I ignored him. My hands knew the movements. Tight folds. Clean lines. No wasted motion. The flag became a triangle. The triangle became weight. When I presented it to my mother, her eyes finally filled. For half a second, I thought she saw me. Then she looked toward the people watching and placed one trembling hand over her mouth. The performance resumed. At the cemetery, the wind cut through every black coat. After the burial, while guests drifted toward their cars, Layla approached me. I'm sorry, Aunt Mara. Thank you. She hesitated. I'm sorry you couldn't come sooner. I studied her face. What do you mean? She frowned. Mom said they called you when Grandpa got worse. She said you told them work was too busy. The ground under my feet seemed to tilt. No, I said quietly. No one called me until after he died. Layla's face went pale. But Mom said, Layla. Olivia's voice sliced through the wind. Layla flinched. Preston stood beside my sister, with one hand in his coat pocket, smiling like a man watching a dog wander too close to traffic. Your grandmother needs you, Olivia said. Layla hesitated. I gave her a small nod. Go. She went. Preston waited until she was out of earshot. Then he stepped closer. Careful, Mara. Careful with what? Teenagers are impressionable. Layla adores a tragic, misunderstood woman. I'd hate for her to get confused. Confused by the truth? His smile widened. Truth is rarely useful without context. That sounds like something a guilty man says. His eyes sharpened. Just for a second, the social mask slipped. Then Olivia joined him, and it returned. Mara, she said, we're having people at the house. Please try not to make things tense. I was planning to pay respects and leave. Good. She glanced at my uniform. And maybe stand somewhere less central. My father had just been lowered into the earth. My niece had just told me she had been lied to. And still, I said nothing. Because when someone wants you to fire blindly, you check the terrain. Olivia and Preston's house was not really a house. It was a declaration. Stone pillars, circular driveway, imported cars, a living room designed to impress people who did not like each other. Inside, the memorial dinner had become a networking event. Men in dark suits discussed markets and municipal projects. Women murmured over wine. A caterer moved through the room with crab cakes on a silver tray. Dad would have hated every inch of it. He liked folding chairs, paper plates, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. I stood near the hallway because my mother had texted me while I was parking. "Please don't make this about you. Preston has important people here. Let Olivia handle guests." "No, I'm glad you came." "No, are you okay?" "Just a reminder to be smaller." I put the phone away and stood beneath a framed family portrait. Mom, Olivia, Preston, and Layla stood on the back patio in matching cream outfits. Dad sat in a chair at the center, thinner than he should have been, smiling like someone pretending not to be tired. I was not in the picture. Earl Bishop arrived 20 minutes later. No one announced him. He slipped through the front door wearing a worn black suit and carrying a small green folder under one arm. My attention locked onto it. The hospice nurse's words came back. "He said you would know." Earl saw me. His face changed. Relief, grief, guilt. He started toward me. Olivia intercepted him. "Earl," she said, too loudly. "How nice of you to come." He looked past her. "I need to speak with Mara." "Later," Olivia said. "We're all very emotional. It concerns Henry." Her hand tightened around her wine glass. "Then it can wait until family is ready." I stepped forward. "Earl." Olivia's eyes warned me. I ignored them. Earl walked around her and hugged me like I was not a problem. He smelled like wool, rain, and old tobacco. "I'm sorry, kid," he whispered. Those 3 words almost broke me. Not the funeral, not the sign, not my mother's cold cheek. Those 3 words, "Thank you for being with him," I said, "wouldn't have been anywhere else." Olivia's voice floated behind him. "Earl, please don't upset her." He turned slowly. "Upset her?" "Yes. Mara has always struggled with emotional regulation." Preston appeared at Olivia's side. There it was again. The setup. Mara was unstable. Mara was dramatic. Mara could not be trusted with her own grief. Preston glanced at the folder. "What's that?" Earl tucked it closer. "Henry's." "Then it belongs with Carol," Preston said. "No," Earl said. The room quieted a little. Preston's smile did not change. "Excuse me? Henry gave it to me for Mara." Olivia laughed softly. "That doesn't sound like Dad." "It sounds exactly like him," I said. My mother rose from the sofa. Her face was pale. "Earl, if Henry had papers, they should come to me." Earl looked at her for a long moment. He said they shouldn't. My mother's hand flew to her chest. A few guests noticed. Olivia moved quickly. "Mom, sit down. Please. This is not the time." Preston stepped closer to Earl. "Why don't I put that folder somewhere safe?" Earl did not move. Preston lowered his voice. "You're upsetting a grieving widow." I watched Earl's fingers tighten. He was angry. Angry men make mistakes. I touched his sleeve. "Not here," I said. He looked at me. I gave one small shake of my head. He understood. "Fine," he said. Olivia exhaled like she had won. Preston looked pleased. That was when he decided to entertain the room. He lifted his glass and tapped it with a fork. The sound rang through the living room. "Everyone?" he called. "Just a moment." My stomach sank. Preston positioned himself in front of the fireplace, beneath a canvas photograph of his own family at some beach resort. No photo of Dad. Not one. "I want to thank all of you for being here to honor Henry," Preston began. He was a simple man. A proud man. A man who believed in hard work. People nodded. "He was also lucky," Preston continued, placing one hand over his heart, "to have Olivia and Carol with him every step of the way." Olivia lowered her eyes modestly. My throat went tight. Preston's gaze slid to me. "And of course, Mara made it today. We're grateful her army job could spare her for the afternoon." A few people chuckled. He smiled wider. "I don't pretend to understand military bureaucracy. I assume someone has to keep track of boots and socks." More laughter. Layla looked down. Earl shifted beside me. Preston raised his glass. "But family is family. Even when life takes people in different directions. Even when some serve from a distance." That was the knife. Serve from a distance. As if every dollar I sent had not crossed that distance. As if absence meant indifference. Preston looked directly at me. "So here's to those who were here when it mattered." The room lifted their glasses. My mother lifted hers. Olivia lifted hers. Layla did not. I saw that. Preston saw it too. His jaw tightened. Then he smiled at me. Unless you'd like to say something, Mara. Maybe tell us what your army job actually is. The room turned. I felt every eye on my uniform. Earl whispered, Mara. I did not look at him. Preston tilted his head. No? Nothing? I think today should be about Dad, I said. How convenient, he replied. That was never your strength, was it? Showing up for family. Olivia stepped forward with wet eyes. Mara, please don't start. I didn't. You always do this, she said. Her voice trembled beautifully. You stand there so cold, and everyone else has to feel guilty for having feelings. Layla looked from her mother to me. I saw the confusion in her face. The damage years of lies can do to a child is quiet. Sometimes it looks like a girl not knowing which adult is safe. Preston took another sip of wine. Then he said the line that ended him. Honestly, Mara, if your army job taught you anything useful, maybe it should have taught you humility. I looked at him. He smiled. Because in the real world, respect is earned. Earl made a sound under his breath. I touched his arm again. No, I said softly. Preston heard. He laughed. Still giving orders? I turned and walked away. Not from fear. Not from surrender. I walked toward the hallway because my phone had vibrated in my pocket. One pulse. Secure message. I stepped beside the coat closet and opened it. Aisha Monroe had sent 6 words. Rivergate discrepancy confirmed. Call when clear. Rivergate was the contract. $50 million. Fort Ashland's facilities modernization. Vehicle maintenance bays. Supply depot upgrades. Secure motor pool repairs. Emergency power systems. Preston's company, Vale Strategic Solutions, had submitted one of the finalist proposals. The moment I saw the finalist list weeks earlier, I had reported the family connection and stepped away from judging his company. In simple terms, I was no longer allowed to score his bid. I could not choose him. I could not reject him. I could not touch the decision. That protected the Army. And it protected me. My office still helped coordinate oversight, but the independent review team controlled the file now. That mattered, because 3 days before Dad died, Aisha's team found something wrong. A veteran-owned company, listed in Preston's proposal, appeared to be fake. The company name was Bennett Field Services. The listed advisor was Henry T. Bennett, my father, my dead father. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Then I saw the service dates, the unit history, the partial Social Security number. My father's identity had been used to strengthen Preston's bid, without his permission, and because I had stepped away from the decision properly, I was not the person who could kill Preston's contract. That would be the independent board. But I could become a witness, a clean one. I typed back. Preserve all records. I have family documents. Then I locked the phone. When I turned around, Layla stood at the end of the hall. She had seen my face. What happened? She whispered. Nothing you need to carry. She stepped closer. Did Mom lie to me? I wanted to say no, but she was 17, not 7. Yes, I said. Her eyes filled. About Grandpa calling you? I don't know everything yet, but I know no one called me before he died. Layla looked toward the living room. She told me you knew. She said you said goodbye on FaceTime. No. Layla covered her mouth. Behind her, Olivia called. Layla? The girl flinched again. That flinch told me more than any confession. Go, I said gently. Don't fight them tonight. What about you? I've survived worse rooms than this. She almost smiled. Then she whispered, Grandpa left something in the garage. I went still. What? He told me not to tell Mom. He said if Aunt Mara came home, tell her to check the old red toolbox. But Mom cleaned the garage yesterday. When yesterday? Before the funeral home delivery. Preston helped. Of course he did. Olivia called again, sharper. Layla. Layla stepped back. I'm sorry, she whispered. I watched her disappear. Then I walked outside. The cold air hit my face. For a moment, I let myself shake. Not much. Just enough to prove I was human. Then Earl stepped out behind me. He held the green folder. I should have told you sooner, he said. Yes, I said. He winced. I promised Henry I'd wait until after the funeral. What is it? He looked through the front window. Inside, Preston was laughing again. Olivia had one arm around my mother. Guests leaned close, absorbing the performance. Earl handed me the folder. Your dad started keeping copies. Copies of what? Bank transfers. Notes. Letters. Things people said when they thought sick men didn't listen. I opened it. The first page was a printed bank statement. My name. Automatic monthly transfers. 3 years. The second page was a hospice invoice marked paid. The third page was Dad's handwriting. Mara paid again. Carol cried when Olivia said Preston covered it. I asked why they let him say that. Carol told me not to embarrass Olivia in front of guests. I read the line twice. Earl pointed to another page. That one matters. It was a copy of a letter from Preston's company. Dear Mr. Bennett, thank you for agreeing to serve as Veteran Community Advisor for Bennett Field Services in partnership with Vail Strategic Solutions. The signature at the bottom looked like my father's. Almost. But Dad never wrote his T that way, and his middle initial was not T. It was James. Preston would not know that. Olivia might. My mother definitely would. Did Dad sign this? I asked. Earl's eyes hardened. No. How do you know? The date says March 15th. Dad was in the hospital. He was unconscious that entire day. My fingers tightened around the paper. Where is the original? In the red toolbox. I closed my eyes. Olivia cleaned the garage yesterday. Earl cursed softly. Then they found it. Maybe. But the folder was only the copy. The real proof was somewhere else. And someone had already tried to make it disappear. Inside the house, my mother appeared in the doorway. Mara, she said. Can we talk? I slipped the folder under my arm. Of course. She glanced at Earl. Alone? No. The word landed between us. She blinked. I am your mother. I know. Then don't speak to me like I'm the enemy. You are not my enemy, Mom. But you have not been my ally in a very long time. Her eyes filled instantly. There it was. The tears. I lost my husband today. I know. And now my daughter is punishing me. I'm not punishing you. You came here dressed like that. You upset your sister. You made Layla question her own mother. And now you're standing on a porch whispering with Earl like we're all criminals. I kept my voice low. Did you know Preston used Dad's name in a defense proposal? The tears vanished. Not slowly. Instantly. That was the answer. What are you talking about? Bennett Field Services. She looked toward the living room. Just once. But Earl saw it too. I don't know anything about Preston's business. Did Dad sign paperwork for him? He signed many things. He was ill. On March 15th? Her mouth opened. No sound came out. Behind her, Olivia appeared. What is going on? I kept my eyes on my mother. Mom? Olivia stepped onto the porch and shut the door. Mara, stop interrogating her. Did Dad sign paperwork for Preston on March 15th? Olivia's face changed. Only for a second. Then the mask returned. Dad wanted to help us. He was unconscious. He had lucid moments. Not that day. You weren't there. The words landed exactly where she aimed them. For 1 second, grief overrode discipline. No, I said. I was paying the bills that kept him there. Olivia recoiled. My mother whispered. Mara. No, I said. Not this time. Olivia's eyes hardened. You really want to do this today? I want the truth. You want attention. Earl stepped forward. She paid for your father's care. Olivia snapped. Stay out of this. He asked me to stay in it. My mother covered her face. Olivia pointed at the folder. Whatever he gave you, it was confused rambling. Dad was sick. Near the end, he kept asking if Mara had called. Her voice cracked. Then she caught herself. But it was too late. Layla had told me enough. Dad asking for me had not made Olivia sad. It had made her angry. The first truth was about money. The second was about jealousy. And jealousy, I would learn, can make people excuse almost anything. The front door opened. Preston stepped out. His smile was gone. Everything okay? Olivia turned to him. Mara is making accusations. Preston looked at me. Then at the folder. He did not ask what accusations. Another answer. Mara, he said softly. You're grieving. You need to be careful what you say. Do I? Yes. Because implying business misconduct without evidence is serious. I agree. His eyes narrowed. He had expected fear. He found procedure. I have no idea what Earl has been feeding you, Preston said. But he's old, lonely, and angry. Earl took a step forward. I caught his sleeve. Preston smiled. You see? Volatile. I looked at the porch ceiling. A small black camera was mounted near the corner. The Vales had cameras everywhere. Preston liked control too much not to. Is that recording? I asked. His expression froze for half a beat. Then he laughed. For safety. Good. Olivia frowned. Why would you say that? Because your husband just called Dad's best friend unstable on camera. Preston's jaw tightened. Don't twist my words. I don't need to. He stepped closer. Listen to me, he said under his breath. Whatever you think you found, put it down. Go back to your base. And don't drag this family through one of your paranoid crusades. You should stop talking. His smile thinned. Or what? You'll cancel my contract? There it was. Not a confession. A fear. I looked at him carefully. I stepped away from your contract weeks ago. His face shifted. He had not expected that. You what? I disclosed the family connection. Independent review controls the file. For the first time all night, he looked truly unsettled. Because a biased sister-in-law he could fight. An independent review board was harder. I walked past them into the house. The room quieted as I entered. People could sense something had changed, even if they did not know why. Layla stood near the staircase. She looked scared. Not of me, of what might be true. The lowest point came 2 days later. Not at the funeral. Not on the porch. It came at the reading of the will. The attorney's office was small, beige, and over-air-conditioned. My mother sat beside Olivia. Olivia sat beside Preston. Layla had insisted on coming and sat near the wall, hands folded tightly in her lap. Earl sat beside me. Preston objected immediately. This is family business. The attorney, a tired woman with silver glasses, looked at Earl. Mr. Bishop is named as a witness in a supplemental letter. Preston frowned. What supplemental letter? We'll get there. My father's will was simple. He had little left. His truck went to Earl. His personal letters went to me. My mother received the remaining bank balance. Then the attorney opened the supplemental letter. My mother looked confused. Olivia looked afraid. Preston looked angry. The attorney began to read. To my family, if this letter is being read, I am gone. And I am sorry for the mess I failed to clean up while I was living. Mara, I ask too much of your silence. My throat closed. The attorney paused. I nodded. She continued. You paid bills no child should have had to pay. You gave more than anyone knew. I let your mother and sister take credit because I was tired and ashamed and did not want my illness to split the family further. Olivia whispered. Oh my God. That was wrong, the attorney read. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. I was not. If anyone tells you Mara abandoned me, they are lying. She called. She paid. She fought for me from wherever the army sent her. If I was comfortable at the end, it was because of her. Layla began to cry silently. My mother stared straight ahead. The attorney turned the page. There is also paperwork Preston asked me to sign. I refused. Later, I saw documents carrying my name. I do not believe my signature was honestly obtained. Preston stood. This is ridiculous. The attorney looked at him. Please sit down. No. This is defamatory. It is a signed statement from the deceased. He was medicated, Earl said. He was clear when he wrote that. Preston turned on him. You need to shut your mouth, the attorney said sharply. Mr. Vale? Layla flinched. I saw it. Preston saw me see it. He sat down. The attorney read the final line. Mara, the original documents are where I always kept the truth. Under the tray of the red toolbox. Silence. Then, Olivia whispered. There is no red toolbox. Earl looked at her. Yes, there is. She shook her head. No. We donated it. When? I asked. She swallowed. Yesterday. Preston leaned back slowly. Too slowly. The attorney looked at me. Colonel Bennett? It was the first time anyone in that room had used my title. Preston's eyes snapped to her. Colonel? The room changed. Olivia looked at me as if I had been hiding a weapon in plain sight. My mother looked embarrassed, as if my rank was an inconvenience she had forgotten to mention. Preston looked calculating. What exactly do you do, Mara? I make sure people who want army money follow army rules. His face went still. Aitisha called me that afternoon. I need a complete timeline, she said. I'm on bereavement leave. I know. I'm sorry. What happened? We received a complaint. Against who? You. I closed my eyes. Of course. What does it say? That you have a personal vendetta against Vale Strategic Solutions and may attempt to influence the Rivergate Award. Who filed it? Anonymous. Aisha. She sighed. The metadata points to a hotel business center near your family's attorney's office. Preston. He had escalated. He was not self-destructing. He was building a story. Mock me publicly. Record my grief. File a complaint. Force the army to question whether I was the problem before the forged paperwork became the problem. That was when I realized Preston was not afraid of being caught. He was trying to make the truth look like revenge. What do you need from me? I asked. Disclosure timeline. All contact with the bidder. Any documents your father left. And Mara? Yes? Do not speak to Preston alone again. I know. Good. Because he is not trying to win an argument. He is trying to build a record. That night, Layla came to my hotel. I opened the door and found her in the hallway wearing a hoodie under her coat. Face pale, eyes swollen. Does your mother know you're here? No. Layla, I found something. She held out a flash drive. My hand did not move. Where did you get that? Grandpa gave it to me before he died. I stared at her. What? He said it was a video about old family stuff. He said not to watch unless people started fighting after the funeral. She wiped her cheek. I thought he meant you. That hurt. She saw it. I'm sorry. I stepped aside. Come in. She sat at the small desk. I stayed near the door so the hallway camera would show she came willingly and left safely. You really paid for everything? She asked. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were a child. I'm not now. No, I said. You're not. She twisted her sleeves. Mom said you left because you couldn't stand us. I left because the army sent me places, and because coming home hurt. Because of Mom? Because no matter what I did, I was always wrong here. Layla nodded like she understood too well. I did not like that. She pushed the flash drive toward me. I watched part of it. And? It's Grandpa. He says Dad tried to make him sign contract papers. He says Mom told him it would help the family. He says he refused because it felt dirty. I sat very still. Anything else? He says if the red toolbox disappears, ask Earl about the church camera. I stood. The church camera? She nodded. Grandpa said Preston came to the garage once before he went back to the hospital. Earl saw him carrying the toolbox and made him put it back. Grandpa said the church camera saw the alley. The church camera. St. Catherine's parking lot overlooked the back of my father's old garage. Dad had repaired those cameras himself. Dad had not just left a memory. He had left a map. The next morning, Earl and I went to St. Catherine's. The priest looked nervous when we asked for footage. What kind of matter is this? He asked. Potential fraud involving a deceased veteran's identity, I said. That opened the door. The footage was grainy but clear enough. 2 nights before the funeral, Preston's SUV pulled behind Dad's old garage. Olivia got out first, and then Preston. They opened the side door with a key. 15 minutes later, Preston came out carrying the red toolbox. Olivia carried a cardboard file box. My mother stood near the SUV, looking up and down the alley. Watching. Not grieving. Watching. Earl cursed softly. I said nothing. The priest murmured, "Oh dear." I asked for a copy. He gave it to me. By the time I returned to Fort Ashland, Preston had launched his next move. Not a viral video. Not a public meltdown. Something smarter. A letter from his attorney to the Army Review Office. It claimed I had a history of hostility toward his family, that I had confronted him at a private memorial, and that any action against Vale Strategic Solutions should be considered tainted by personal bias. Attached were selected clips from his porch camera. Me stepping toward Olivia. Earl looking angry. My mother crying. A perfect little picture of a grieving family under attack by a bitter soldier. Aisha watched it in my office. He's good, she said. Yes. He left out the part where he threatened you. Yes. She closed the laptop. Luckily, cameras are better witnesses when you don't get to choose the whole tape. I handed her the church footage, Dad's green folder, Layla's flash drive, bank records, hospice notes, and the copy of the advisor agreement. I'm not asking you to use any of this because I'm angry, I said. I know. I stepped away from the decision. I know. I don't want anyone saying I used my position to punish him. Aisha looked at me. Mara, that is exactly why this evidence matters. You didn't bury him. He walked into an independent review carrying a shovel. The official review happened 4 days later. I was not allowed in the main room while the board questioned Preston. That was the rule. And for once, I was grateful for rules. I sat alone on a bench in the hallway outside the review suite, wearing my uniform, hands folded, eyes fixed on a vending machine across from me. A machine selling pretzels and diet soda became the only thing I could safely look at while people behind a closed door discussed my dead father's signature. Every few minutes, voices rose behind the wall, then dropped. The first time the door opened, Aisha stepped out. Her face gave away nothing. They denied knowledge of the medical record, she said. What did you show them? March 15th. Sedated. Non-responsive. Unable to consent. I nodded once. She went back inside. The door shut. 20 minutes later, she came out again. They're calling the middle initial a clerical error. Henry T. Bennett, I said. Your father was Henry James Bennett. Yes. That matters. Then she looked at me for half a second longer. He knew it mattered too. She went back in. The hallway felt colder after that. I thought about Dad in that hospice bed, weak, but still sharp enough to know the shape of his own name. I thought about Olivia saying he had lucid moments. I thought about my mother looking down at her plate. Then the door opened a third time. This time, I heard Preston's voice before I saw anyone. We were led to believe our proposal was the strongest. Aisha's voice followed, calm and precise. Led by whom? Silence. Then, Preston said, I meant based on our internal assessment. The door closed again. That one sentence did not prove a leak, but it made the room shift. I could feel it through the wall. 30 minutes later, the door opened. Preston walked out. His face had gone a strange, pale gray. Not frightened like a man facing prison. Frightened like a man who just realized the room no longer belonged to him. He saw me on the bench. For 1 second, he looked like he wanted to say something. Then he looked past me, down the empty hallway, and kept walking. No insult, no smile, no performance. Just the sound of expensive shoes moving faster than dignity. Aisha stepped out behind him. It's enough, she said. I stood slowly. What does that mean? It means Vale Strategic Solutions is suspended from further consideration pending investigation. I closed my eyes. Not because I was relieved. Because I was tired. Aisha's voice softened. Mara. I opened my eyes. You didn't do this, she said. The evidence did. That was the line I needed. Not victory. Not revenge. Just clean ground under my feet. The family learned the truth 2 days later. Not in a dramatic government conference room, but in the same attorney's office where Dad's letter had been read. The attorney had called everyone back to discuss Dad's personal effects and potential misuse of his identity. Preston came because he thought he could still manage the room. Olivia came because she had nowhere else to hide. My mother came because she was afraid. Layla sat beside me this time, not across the room. That small choice said more than any speech. The attorney placed copies of the evidence on the table. Dad's letter, the bank transfers, the hospice record, the forged advisor agreement, the church camera stills, no classified material, no procurement secrets, just family truth and public records. Preston's face was pale, but controlled. This proves nothing criminal, he said. The attorney adjusted her glasses. It proves enough for this family to understand why Mr. Bennett left instructions. Olivia stared at the signature page. Her hands trembled. You told me it was harmless, she whispered. Preston looked at her. Not now. You said Dad would have wanted to help Layla's future. Olivia, you said nobody checks those community advisor pages. The room went still. Preston's eyes sharpened. Stop talking. Layla stared at her mother. You knew? Olivia's face tightened. I knew your grandfather wanted to help. No, Layla said. You said it was just paperwork. You don't understand what it was like, Olivia snapped. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were wet now, but the anger was still there. You don't know what it was like, Mara. I was the one changing sheets. I was the one cleaning the kitchen. I was the one sitting there when he couldn't sleep. Her voice cracked. And he still asked for you. Nobody spoke. Olivia swallowed hard. Every day. Mara called? Did Mara text? Did Mara get my message? Is Mara safe? Is Mara eating? Every day. Her hands curled around the edge of the table. I was there. You were gone. And somehow, even from wherever the army sent you, you were still the one he trusted. The room fell silent. There it was. Not a clean excuse. Not forgiveness. But the truth. Olivia looked at me, mascara running. I hated that he looked at you like you were the strong one. I said nothing. She whispered. I wanted one thing to be mine. So you took the credit for his care? She flinched. You let your daughter believe I abandoned him? She covered her mouth. You helped Preston use his name? I didn't understand how serious it was. You understood enough to hide the toolbox. That broke her. She folded over the table and cried. Not pretty crying. Not performance. The kind that comes when the story you built finally refuses to hold you. My mother lifted her head. Mara, she whispered. I didn't know it was fraud. I believed that. I also knew it was not enough. You knew it was wrong. Her lips trembled. Olivia said it would help Layla, and you chose comfort over Dad. She looked down. I was afraid of losing everything. There it was. Fear. Not evil, not innocence. Fear. I was your daughter, I said. She cried harder. I know. No, I said. You knew when you needed money. You forgot when I needed a mother. She had no answer. Then she reached across the table. Can we start over? I looked at her hand. For years, I had wanted that question, but not like this. Not after proof. Not after consequences. Not because the comfortable lie had finally become too expensive. Starting over requires telling the truth, I said, without crying over the consequences. She pulled her hand back. Preston stood. This is pathetic. No one moved. He looked at Olivia. You understand what you've done? Olivia looked up. For the first time, she looked afraid of him in front of us. Layla stepped between them. Don't talk to her like that. Preston laughed once. Small. Cruel. You have no idea what this family just cost me. I stood too. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just enough. No, Preston, I said. You cost yourself. His eyes burned into mine. You think you won? No. My voice was quiet. I think Dad finally stopped losing. That landed. Preston had no comeback. Because the room no longer belonged to him. That is the thing about people who control stories. They look powerful until the audience changes. 3 months later, Preston Vale was no longer CEO of Vale Strategic Solutions. The company lost Rivergate. Then it lost 2 private partners. The investigation did not end with handcuffs at a dinner table. Real consequences are usually quieter than that. Board meetings, legal letters, suspended bids, resignations, reputations collapsing one phone call at a time. I did not follow every detail. I did not need to. Layla visited me at Fort Ashland before starting college. She arrived with a backpack, a nervous smile, and Dad's old toolbox key on a chain around her neck. I thought you might want this, she said. I looked at the key. No, I said. You keep it. Why? Because you opened the right door. She smiled then. A real one. We walked around the base visitor center. She asked questions about my work. Not the movie version. The real version. Ethics. Contracts. Logistics. The boring machinery that keeps soldiers alive. So you don't fold socks? She asked. Then she panicked. I'm sorry. Bad joke. I laughed. It surprised both of us. Sometimes socks matter, I said. Wet feet can ruin a mission. Before she left, she hugged me hard. Grandpa was right about you, she whispered. I closed my eyes. No, I said. He was stubborn about me. That too. That evening, I drove to the veterans cemetery alone. Dad's stone was simple. Henry James Bennett, beloved husband, father, soldier, friend. I placed one sunflower at the base. Not roses. Never roses. Dad's old brass watch sat on my wrist. Earl had given it to me after the attorney meeting. It lost 4 minutes every day. I wore it anyway. I'm sorry I didn't make it, I said. The wind moved over the grass. I know you told me not to fight, I whispered. But you also told me not to lie. For the first time since the hospice call, the silence did not feel like punishment. It felt like peace. My family had called me cold, because I stopped burning myself to keep them warm. They called me absent, because they could not see the miles my love had traveled. They called my job small, because they did not understand that real service rarely announces itself in rooms full of wine glasses. Preston thought my silence meant I had no power. Olivia thought my distance meant I had no place. My mother thought my love would always come with an invoice she could ignore. They were all wrong. The people who mock your work, your sacrifice, your uniform, or your quiet endurance are usually not confused about your worth. They are terrified that one day you will remember it. And when I finally did, I did not have to shout. I did not have to beg. I did not have to prove I was family to people who had turned family into a transaction. I simply stood still, long enough for the truth to arrive. Then I walked away clean.